Great. And if there's, this is a live stream, so there's a little more, natural ambiance. Yeah. Immersion. That's a great word.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Hello. Welcome to Outrage Optimism. My name's Tom Rivett-Carnac.
Well done.
Wait a second, Tom. That was like a bit much. Can you do that over again? With less turbocharge.
Let's turbocharge.
And also, Christiana, are you going to follow Tom or not?
Well, not at this. I'm Christiana. I think.
Hello. This is Outrage
And
Optimism.
Here, I'll tell you what. I'll do it.
I don't know how you put up with us.
I'll give you the cue. I'll
Okay.
give you the cue. Okay. We got audio speeds, camera speeds. Are you guys recording?
We're ready.
Okay. Tom, take it away.
Hello. Welcome to Outrage and Optimism, a new podcast about dealing with the climate crisis and remaking the world. Welcome to our very first live broadcast. I'm Tom Rivett-Carnac.
I'm Christiana Figueres.
I'm Paul Dickinson.
And I'm Clay Carnell.
Welcome, Clay. Clay is the producer, and he's featuring on this episode in all sorts of ways. So this is a very different episode of Outrage and Optimism. This is going to be a freewheeling version. We've been live for about 3 months now and experimenting with different ways of doing things.
Hold on. What does freewheeling mean?
Freewheeling means we have no agenda. We have no particular thing we want to discuss. We're just going to see what happens.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's emergent.
It's emergent.
Emergent. Okay, I like
But
that.
what we do know is that we've been live for 3 months. We've had a great time. We've interviewed a whole range of different people. And we want to say thanks to everyone who's been listening, who's been dialing in. I mean, I personally would say
Particularly to the people who've been sending us feedback.
sending feedback. We'll get to that. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I have to say we started this 3 months ago with really zero idea of what was going to happen.
Sorry, zero experience in doing this.
Zero experience, zero idea, potentially high expectations in Paul's case.
And huge talent. So luckily, it was the talent that I think took us through. And the dedication and the vision.
Speak for yourself.
We've been trying
Mr.
so
Dickinson.
hard to keep you in your box, Paul.
Wow,
Yeah.
You know.
So anyway, so here we are after 3 months, and what we wanted to do is just have this discussion, reflect on where we are, and answer some questions that have been coming in from people over the last few days. So, anything you guys want to kick off with? Christiana?
Well, this is rather different from what we've usually done.
It is different.
I kind of like that.
All right.
Because I'm very much of a go as you go kind of person.
I've noticed that about
Have
you
you?
over the years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes,
And I'm also very intuitive.
uh-huh.
And so I kind of like just being thrown into cold water. Actually, today it's not cold. It's very, very hot.
Very
It's the
hot
warmest
day, yeah.
July day on record in the UK.
In the UK.
In the UK, yeah. And it's been
A record that shall be broken over
approaching
and over
feeling
and
unpleasant,
over
I would
again.
say. Yeah.
Yeah, well, for you Brits. For us tropical souls, we're fine.
You're fine. Yeah.
In any event, so this is quite delightful.
Okay. You having a good
let's
time, Mr. Paul?
No, I very much enjoy the sound of my own voice. I enjoy the people that, interviewed some very cool people like Theresa May, the Prime Minister, after she declares a net zero 2050. Greta Thunberg, who's just an amazing person. They make effigies of Greta Thunberg and they march after her, millions of people. I mean, I think your career's going well when people are making models of you and marching by the million behind you. Interviewed some great politicians, but one thing that just stuck out for me was hearing the very distinguished and lovely David Attenborough,
With whom we premiered.
with whom we premiered, name it actually, and in our first episode say he couldn't think about the world his grandchildren lived in. I know that sounds like a terrible and negative thing to bring up, but it was so memorable. I just wanted to highlight that as something that's come out of this. Maybe contrast it with some of the incredible positivity of Aurora. But there's been a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, going back to David Attenborough, I mean, I think, he's obviously had such a significant impact on my life, on our lives, and on so many different people. And that was a real highlight for me, was to speak to him. But I think also, yes, and you've sort of, you've mentioned Greta. To me, Aurora was a remarkable human being. And to sort of sit and listen to her and talk about...
She still is a human being.
That's true, but we're not currently interviewing her.
Okay.
But yes, no, thank you.
Thank you both also for working through that, quite well.
What about you? Who've your favourite interviews been?
Wow, that's a difficult choice. But yeah, I was actually, frankly, I was moved to tears by the interview with Aurora because I thought she spoke so much from her soul, from her heart. You know, otherwise, most of the people that we've spoken to, they're speaking out of their brilliant mind.
Right.
But to have that conversation that came from a very young woman who speaks straight out of her heart, I thought was so beautiful and so unfiltered by the usual mind filters that we put everything that we say through. I was just moved. I was truly moved to tears.
You know who else, and this is probably not expected, but I was also very impressed with William Hague. Just because he's such a different sort of person for us to speak to. And I thought he had maybe quite a different sense of a philosophy around what we're going to do about climate change, but I really got a sense from him that he really wanted to do something very significant about it and was approaching it from a very different perspective. And for me, that was kind of really refreshing because we often miss that sort of difference of philosophy with a common objective.
And I was very fond of Jane Goodall. You know, here's someone who's kind of like an incredibly famous naturalist, and she gave a perfect and very succinct summary of the dangers of certain types of corporate influence on the political process. And I thought, yeah, I mean, she was just more eloquent and deft in explaining things that I normally take an hour or 3 to explain. She just had it.
So where do we want to take this next? What do we want to do next with the podcast?
Well, sorry, I thought you had actually invited some comments, questions.
That's true. We'll get to those in just a moment. So Clay is going to join us, and maybe we should do
Clay
that first.
yeah.
Why don't we dive in, have a few questions from people who've provided them, and then we'll see where we go.
So how have those questions come in?
So we put out a tweet on your account a couple of days ago and on Outrage and Optimism Twitter account and on Instagram, and a few people have provided comments, but more than that, we've had people email in. So the email address is podcast@globaloptimism.com, and we've had about 300 different people.
Really?
Yeah, send in different questions of different types.
Yay.
There's been a lot of repetition between them. You know, obviously there's, people want to ask particular things, but from all over the world. And we've picked, I think, 8 or 9 that Clay has picked. We don't know what they are.
Yes.
Clay has picked them, and we have no idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Clay, why don't you introduce yourself? No one knows who you are yet.
Hi, I'm Clay Carnill. You've probably heard my name at the end, if you made it to the end with the credits. And Tom says, Outrage and Optimism is produced by Clay Carnill. That's me. But aren't you going to ask me what my
Does he get your name
episode
right,
was?
Clay?
Oh, yeah, Clay, your favorite episode.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Tom's getting my name right, yeah.
Okay, good. Good job.
Stop the clock is right twice a day.
My favorite interview so far, I think, was I really enjoyed the interview with Ellie Goulding, where we all kind of met up in New York. That was so fun.
Yes,
and
that was beautiful.
My second favorite actually has not released yet, so I'm looking forward to that one. And everyone will have to look
nice.
forward to that one
Ooh.
too. Yeah. But we
should point out, actually, sorry, Clay, we should point out that most of the time we are not in the same place as the people we talk to. So Clay does an amazing job of sending people microphones or arranging systems whereby we don't have to get on planes, we don't have to go to different places, but it sounds like we're in the room, but usually we're not.
Yeah.
But luckily, what we're doing is we're not releasing our secrets at all. So that's just, if you're listening, just don't tell anyone. That's how we do it. So
and sometimes I'm in the room with the person, but the rest of you are not. So
we're not,
that's our great secret, is for people to try to figure out which one, where everybody is.
Okay, quick question. Have we ever done an interview in which none of us are in the room?
Well, we're all in separate rooms.
No. In the room with the person we're interviewing. Yes, we have.
Yes. Yeah, we have.
Yes, we have 2 actually recently.
Do we want to say
so we're
it, or
getting
do we want
better
to keep
at
it a
this.
secret?
No, we don't want
I'm
to.
actually working on some software that can replace us entirely, and just like the app will interview the people and.
Or Bill McKibben. None of us
we're getting better at this because honestly, we should not be having to get on a plane, train, bus, car. We should actually be able to do all of this, not virtually, but what is it called?
Remotely.
Not IRL.
Not IRL, which I've just recently learned is
in real life.
In real life. Is that pathetic that we now have an acronym for IRL?
Yeah, people have more and more difficulty with IRL and feel more comfortable with the kind of online environments because they're more immersive and, you can switch it off.
Yeah.
Clay, what do the people say?
Yes, so
Tell
let's
us
get
what the
to
people
some
want.
of these questions. I've got a few here. We'll try to keep it to answer as many questions as we can that we have laid out, but let's just get right into it. The first question
What
is,
factors, what criteria did you use to sort through the questions and choose them for us to surprise us?
I'm sorry, say that again?
What criteria did you use to choose the questions that you're going to surprise us with?
Mostly questions that I felt like we could expound upon and that I felt like would be important to the majority of our audience.
Okay.
So
Cool.
let's just get right into it.
Go for it.
The first question is from Alex from Edinburgh. And they ask, do you agree with Greta Thunberg that the UK's target of net zero by 2050 is doing more harm than good? Let me say that one more time. Do you agree with Greta Thunberg that the UK's target of net zero by 2050 is doing more harm than good?
I actually have a little opinion about that.
Do you go for it? You go
do.
first. Yeah.
So the target of the UK has two components, as you've just clearly said. One is the net zero, which means 100% reduction, no tolerance for anyone. And the other piece is the date. I happen to think that the no tolerance piece is the more important part. Because and I think we talked about this on one of our podcasts, the psychology that we all humans, operate under is if there's a rule, but then there's a little exception, we all go like, well, I'm going to get into the exception of that rule.
Right.
So it used to be 80%. In fact, just a few months ago, it was 80% by 2050. And I am sure that there were industries, companies, whatever, that were saying, okay, that's fine for everybody else, but I'm going to be in the 20%. And so the fact that the UK government actually moved it up to 100% is, to me, the important part, because then there is no hiding. Then everybody knows we all have to tighten our belt. I also happen to think that once that we change our chip and understand that this is not only doable, but actually beneficial for all of us, that the date becomes somewhat irrelevant because we will be able to get there before.
Provided it's close enough to affect investment cycles. I mean, net zero by 2200 would be nobody's business, but net zero in an investment cycle.
Well, but 2050 is within the investment
That's
cycle.
what I mean. Yeah. So the date has to be within the ballpark.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, now that the UK is actually heading for, intending, now we have to move it to heading for, 100% reduction by 2050, my sense is that the UK will be able to do it before 2040. That's my bet.
Dickinson, what do you think?
Call me in 2040, Paul.
Okay, I'll just make a note.
Do that.
It's an odd thing to say, but I'm absolutely sure they're both right.
Which both?
I think Theresa May is absolutely right to declare net zero by 2050, and I believe Greta Thunberg is absolutely right to say that it's doing more harm than good. And what I mean by that is a paradoxical position, but I believe in paradoxical duality. I believe they can be defined and resolved. What we have is someone with enormous political authority declaring something significant for a country, and we have someone with enormous social authority, the authority of youth. This is discrimination against young people, saying this is doing more harm than good. And out of that tension, I believe we will move forward to bigger and better goals in future. So I think the question, whilst a very good question, I'm gonna give it an odd answer. Yes to both.
That is such a fudge, Paul.
Oh, okay. But luckily, we have Captain Clarity here, one of the cleanest and smartest thinkers in the world, who's going to give a better answer.
Well, I don't know if it's a better answer, but I think it comes down to how you think change happens in society. So I think that there is a model of change in which you think that you have to set a direction and then that direction gets fulfilled. And on that basis, I do think that what Greta is saying is that the UK is implying that business as usual can just basically carry on because it's so far away in the future. And so I think from that perspective, I can see what she means. But my perspective would actually be that change happens through a signal and a series of escalating steps on the way to that signal. So you set a target and that sets a direction. That leads to 1,000 small changes, which then lead to another 1,000 small changes. So I would disagree that it's causing more harm than good. I think it's a very helpful thing to have. And I think it will get improved as time goes on. And I personally feel like we should acknowledge and recognize when political leaders do bold things like that.
Oh, but I totally am acknowledging and recognizing
That's
it. I'm
right.
just having my cake, eating it, and backsliding. Next
Fair
question,
enough.
please.
Yeah. Next question. The next question is from Virendra in Bangalore. And they ask, what technologies do you see emerging right now that you think are going to make a big difference? What technologies do you see emerging right now that you think are going to make a big difference?
There's an almost palpable sense of anticipation coming from Paul as a result of that question.
Hurry up, because I'm chomping at the bit also.
Okay, I'll be very quick. Essentially, we have renewable energy. Everyone loves it. It's going to be huge. Electric vehicles, very important, going to be huge. We have a revolution in food, which is going to be incredible. Animal agriculture is going to reduce far faster than anybody realizes with all this new food science. But the big one I want to offer you is what I call dematerialized economic growth. I mean, when we get, higher technological capabilities, better video communications, we won't travel so much, and, we enjoy our newspapers on our iPads, no paper. Thank you.
Cool. I like that. I would put that also up there at the top. Are we allowed to have more than one at the top, Clay?
More than what?
Technology.
Oh, of course.
You
Yeah.
asked us what is the-
Technologies.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, technologies. Okay, good.
Yes.
Insulation.
So it's so I would agree with Paul that dematerializing everything is going to be very exciting. I would add to that the oldest technology we have ever had as a human race. And that would be, come on then, Paul.
Using sticks to get into coconuts?
Imagination.
Well, true. No.
Collaboration. Cooperation.
Well, actually, I defined it wrong. It's not the oldest technology we as humanity has ever had, but the oldest technology nature has had. And I'm looking at it right now. And it is natural carbon capture and storage. And, for so much discussion about geological carbon capture and storage and, the cost and the risks and the all of that. But you compare it to biological carbon capture and storage, to what trees can do, and this absolutely brilliant, exciting new report that came out just 2 or 3 weeks ago that said that without impinging on the land that we need for food production and without impinging on the land that we need for living, for urban areas, that we can reforest, because it's lands that don't have forest right now, 2 billion acres. And that is just so exciting. And here's the deal, right? If we do that, then we could actually capture and store 2/3 of the greenhouse gases that we humans have put up in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution.
Wow.
Why are we not doing this?
Returning to the climate to something like it was in sort of around 1950.
I mean, it is amazing.
Yeah.
And there is no risk to that technology. There's no safety risk. It is the cheapest technology we have
Doesn't
around.
interfere with food production.
Doesn't interfere. It's the most
Yeah.
beautiful technology. I mean, who doesn't like trees? You can say you don't like wind turbines. I happen to love them. But who doesn't like trees? Honestly, why are we not doing this?
It's true. So I'm going to go a slightly different direction. I'm going to say machine learning. So I don't know if you guys have seen a paper that came out about a month ago called Machine Learning and Climate Change, and it'll just blow your mind. It talks about the unbelievable phase transition step changes that are possible in efficiency and things like, distribution of the grid and use of renewable energy, in how we design cities and how those cities get deployed and how we use different types of transport. There is kind of no area that we have to transform and transition that is not touched and transformed by the ability of machine learning to make it wildly more efficient. And I think it's going to change.
Not wildly.
Not wildly, because the trees are wild, you mean?
The trees are wild, but AI is anything other than wild.
Right.
Systematically more. Yes, we have to get our adverbs right here.
All right. Systematically more efficient.
There you go.
Yeah.
Before the next question, Clay, I'd just like to say that I do think machines, are growing, conscious and will be much more powerful than us. And I just want to make a pitch to our robot
new
masters in the
overlords.
future that I'm fully supportive of your leadership, and I would very much like to be part of the group that are considered for continuation.
You
when the
picked
time
up.
comes.
You picked up on my subtext.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you
Clay.
thank Siri and Alexa every day? Do you say thank you for another day here?
Not yet, but I'm more than willing to if it's appropriate.
That's great. So thank you, Virendra, for your question. The next question we have is, I like the name of your podcast and I enjoy the conversations, but
Who's it from?
Oh, I'm sorry. Who's it from?
Yeah.
This is from Carla, age 14, in Utrecht.
Ooh.
Oh, hi, Colin.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And it's a great
All right,
question.
Go ahead.
So, but it starts with a compliment, which is always how you should start a great question.
Nice.
I like the name of your podcast and I enjoy the conversations, but I feel much more.
But here we
Yes,
go.
but-
But.
Very nicely constructed. Yeah.
But I feel
Carla.
much more
Yeah.
outrage than optimism. Are you really optimistic? If so, how do you manage to stay that way? And I know that we kind of covered this on a recent episode, but I'm also curious to hear how you all manage to be optimistic as well.
I think that has to be you first, Christiana.
Well, the first thing that I can say, Carla, is that we're also outraged. It is absolutely, frankly, unforgivable that that we have known what we're doing for the past 30 years and that we have accomplished so little. So, your outrage is one that we definitely echo. And we echo it a little bit from a different perspective than you, because you're 14 and you're joining this planet, and we've been kind of around for a while. But what I want you to know is that even those of us who have been around for a while and who have given our lives to this, we're also outraged. So welcome to the outraged team. Why do we still remain optimistic? Well, I frankly don't think that we have any other choice. Because outrage has a place, and despair and anger and all of that has a very important place, and we're there with you. But if that is the only thing that we entertain, then we box ourselves in to helplessness and to the inability to do something more about the issue. So from our perspective, we don't have that luxury. The climate crisis is one that is so deep that we do not have the luxury of despair. We do not have the luxury of hopelessness anymore. We are now in a position in which we have to, honor the anger and the despair, and at the same time hold two realities in equal standing, which is the anger and the despair and the outrage, but also charge forward. Because it's not like we have any guarantee of success, but frankly, failure is completely unthinkable. It is unacceptable. So we have to be able to rally all the forces within us to say, right, this is absolutely unacceptable, and I'm going to do something about it. Because otherwise, we will be saddled with the worst scenario that scientists have given us. So why am I optimistic? Because I choose to, and because I think it's my responsibility to be optimistic.
Yeah. And
for you.
And if I can clarify, she did ask, how do you manage to stay that way? So I don't know if each one of you has maybe a small answer to put you on the spot. Is there something small that you do that helps you? Because her question is, how do you manage to stay that way?
How?
Through
I got a
everything that
simple
we're
one.
reading and everything we're seeing.
No, I got a simple one, which builds very much on what Christiana said. But I was at a conference, actually, and someone said something which was just perfect. A lot of people were talking about despair and climate change. And this person said, despair is a luxury that is not allowed to people in a real crisis. You see, I I think we all believe this is a real crisis. And if this is a real crisis, I've got to be completely focused on doing something about that crisis. And therefore, despair is not useful for me.
I think there's also, and I think that both of those are really good sort of philosophical arguments in favor of being optimistic and why optimism is kind
he's
of...
now going to dismiss the whole thing.
No,
It's
I'm
coming,
not.
it's coming.
It's not yet.
I can feel the wave coming. Carry on.
But I also, building on that, think that there are very practical reasons to be optimistic. You know, I mean, I think, and we've talked about this before, there is this exponential curve of impact, which is now coming faster and faster. And you only have to look at the news, which is something I don't recommend if you want to stay optimistic. You only have to look at the news around the world, particularly now, this summer, 2019, the heat waves, you know, record temperatures get broken and they get broken again 2 weeks later. It's kind of ridiculous. And if you are in anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, and you imagine what it's like living in cities in parts of the world where they don't have the ability to get cool, the ability to kind of manage these things in a way that those of us who are fortunate enough to live in countries where we do have those things, it's kind of unfathomable what that's like. But I also think with that sort of exponential curve of impact, there is an exponential curve of solutions, which is kind of racing it. And it's hard to appreciate how quickly things are changing now with the way the economics is changing, the way that the economics of renewables is changing, the deployment of new technologies. I think we're really going to find out in the next 5 years if we're serious about dealing with this issue. And I don't think we really know if we are yet. So I'm optimistic that we will make the right choice in the next 5 years. And there are positive signs that we can really make this transition. And to your second point, Clay, that was implied by the question, I actually don't look at the news anymore. So I listen to The Daily, the New York Times podcast, and that's how I get my news. It's a much more peaceful way to get news. It's 20 minutes, you kind of get a sense of what's going on, but you're not constantly scrolling, sort of consuming media in a way that kind of drags you into it and drags you down. And that's been a huge part of me remaining optimistic.
Okay, can I come back with one more thing? Because
Sure, yeah.
I also, a lot of my optimism is my responsibility to future generations, but a whole bunch of my optimism comes from them. Not because of them, but from them. Because I don't know how many young people I know and I constantly meet who, on the one hand, are really concerned, and some of them have actually even decided they're not going to have children because this is in their thinking just too painful to bring children. But they have decided they are not going to sell their brains to companies that are irresponsible.
Yeah.
They are not going to give in to the one-use plastic thing, to the whole fossil fuel slavery thing. You know, I mean, I just derive so much inspiration from young people who are changing their lives. And they don't aspire to have a driver's license and a car by the time they're 16 or 18. They're actually much more into a different economy. And they're already thinking differently. And so part of me, as I say, is responsibility toward that generation. But a lot of my optimism is just from seeing they were born with a different chip. Yay! Fantastic.
Great. So let's get to the next question, which is actually kind of a great transition here. It's about the media. And Christiana, it's from Costa Rica. So,
yes, the tiny, wonderful Costa Rica. Dun, dun, dun.
Where we have a surprising number of listeners.
Yeah.
Well, I would
you
hope
go.
that
That's
it's not surprising.
surprising.
Okay. Now,
So-
Clay, here's my challenge to you.
Okay.
Can you please read that question in Spanish?
No. Maybe if I
Or
had
pronounce
more.
the name of the person who sent
Yeah,
it
at
correctly.
least pronounce the name of the person in Spanish.
Okay, I can do that. I'm gonna
Okay, try.
one up Tom here.
Okay.
Marcelo from Costa
Good.
Rica.
Marcelo from Costa Rica. Perfecto.
Yes.
A ver.
Do you think the media is improving in its coverage of the climate crisis? What can we do to make that move faster?
I do think the media is improving, and you know, I've been watching this actually since before the Paris Agreement, and we noticed a huge uptick in not only media coverage but media understanding, which is as important as coverage. As we went from 2010 to 2015, there was a huge improvement in both the volume of coverage, the scale, but also the understanding. And that's not easy, right, for journalists to understand climate change, because most journalists have 1,000 other things on their docket, and then we throw this complexity at them and we expect them to put it forward to the public in an understandable way. And so I have huge respect for journalists who do that. But then, very interestingly, after the Paris Agreement, about 2016, we saw a downfall of attention of the media, and now it's coming back. And the way that you see that is not only in the number of articles that are coming out in climate change, but how many of the major media companies are actually putting in special budgets to build teams that are going to be covering climate change. That's very new. That has happened, I would say, in the past 6 to 9 months, that all of a sudden you see that there are specialist journalists on board covering climate, covering all of the other environmental issues. And also, you are beginning to see some of the major media actually take a position on climate and say, right, we are going to cover the facts. We are no longer going to allow the fake news to, spoil our coverage here. And so all of that is very, very good news, very good news. So I'm very happy about all of that. To the second question about how much, what the question was, how can we improve that? Was that the question?
Yep.
Yes. The question is what that Marcelo has is what can we do to make that move faster?
Well, I think the media industry, like any other industry, works on supply and demand. And so the more interest there is from the public to be educated and to be brought up to speed with what is happening on policy or on science or on investment or technology development related to climate change, the more motivated these media are going to be. So it is a self-reinforcing cycle. I think, as I said before, I think there is an openness that we haven't seen before, but it has to be fertilized by interest from the users.
I think generally, I think you're right. But I also.
Well, thank you.
Well, but generally. But not specifically. But I think specifically it depends entirely on where you live. So, I've been really interested.
Just carry on.
Right, just at the moment, with it getting so hot. And I've been looking at all the different news websites and seeing how they cover it. And if you look at The Sun in the UK, no mention of climate change. You look at Fox News and Breitbart, obviously no mention of climate change. Most of these different outlets, if you look at them, haven't really moved. And if you look at the numbers, they're massive that those different outlets are using. So I do think in general, those who are minded to do something about climate reporting are getting better at it. But I think there's a large amount. And if you live in certain parts of the world, I think the majority of your media still doesn't do it properly.
And I think that's where Marcelo's coming from, right? Because I think even in a country like Costa Rica that is very environmentally committed, if the implied message from his question is the Costa Rican press is not delivering enough coverage, I would totally agree.
Oh, really? Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
Just a final thing for me is that I think the most important thing in the world is the public understand how serious the situation is. Probably the most dangerous dollar in the whole world is one that is used to suppress information about climate change going to the public. I hope we're seeing a decline in that fantastically irresponsibly spent money. It is vital that the public are told about this critical issue. Clay, next question, because I know we're on a time penalty because you've got to go.
Yes, we've got a couple more questions. This one is actually from Paul in London. This question.
Okay, is this you, Paul? Is it a different Paul?
I gotta go. The phone's ringing.
Well, wait. Make him sit down, and he needs to answer this.
Sit down. He has to
actually.
answer
He'll be interested in this question.
Okay.
The question is, why don't you let Paul Dickinson do the interviews?
Paul.
It's a bit awkward for me to talk about this. I was involved in some of the early interviews, and a lot of the time the other person was doing more talking than I thought was appropriate, and I was I was making my point.
They didn't realize that their role was to make you
I'm
look
speaking.
good. That's right.
And so Cristiano and Tom...
Hopefully the message is coming through as to why he's not. Sorry.
Yeah, whatever. It's a stupid question. Next question.
Oh,
Actually,
I'm
there's
sorry.
no reason for that.
That was really funny.
The serious answer to that question, there's actually no reason for that.
Well, actually, I've got a job and I have to go to work, whereas these two are kind of, saunter around the world. Sorry.
Well, Paul from London, thank you for your question. The next question.
Did that really come from someone called Paul from London?
Paul from London.
I did send it, actually.
Paul, comma, from London. Okay, so the next question, we're going to the United States. And the question, there's a little bit of a story here, and then the question gets towards the end. So let me read this to you. This is from Rachel from the great state of Texas. Rachel says, I'm 27 years with friends getting married and on the path to kids all around me. I can't help but wonder if it's better for me to not have kids. It would mean fewer humans using resources, and also I don't want my future children to have a life of turmoil and being unable to thrive. Would it even make a difference if I did not have children? Or should I have kids and teach how, or should I have kids and teach them how to protect the planet? It's from Rachel. Guys, any thoughts on that?
I got a quick answer. Nobody says there's too many insects. The insects are our friends. They go and eat all our trash and turn it into lovely things. The problem isn't necessarily there's too many people, it's how they live. And so if you're going to create the perfect citizen who's going to, create the new structure of society that saves us, go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I think and interestingly, that is a comment from a man who has chosen not to have children because of climate change. So that should be pointed out, which is interesting.
And also, it's not that we have too many insects. We have too few insects, by the way, because we've killed
Insecticide.
Yes.
Yeah. I think this is a really difficult issue, and I think it comes down to climate change, but I also think it comes down to, there was a time in history when children were assets and they're liabilities now. You have children and it changes the whole pattern of the amount of money you need, on how you choose to live, the types of places you might want to live. And that's a decision that increasingly people are making new choices on. I found about this new movement the other day called FIRE, Financial Investment for Retirement Early, where people are realizing that they're never going to be able to afford the deposit on houses with crazy house prices, and instead are choosing to kind of invest money and then kind of retire early and live a sort of more relaxed life and not be part of the rat race. And that's a slight aside to say that new types of choices are legitimate in this very new world that we're in. And I don't think that, I would be very sad to feel that people are feeling forced into a corner to make certain choices about children at this point because of the climate. And I think if somebody really wants to have kids, they should have kids. And they should raise them to do all the things that we know they will if they have asked that type of question. But I think also if, there are people who kind of decide to make a different choice for their lives. And I think that people shouldn't feel forced to have children either, because that's the socially acceptable thing to do. So we're going to have to figure this out as we go and as we feel our way through in this new world. But I think there are a lot of people going through the same thing that Rachel is going through at the moment.
So I also think that this is a very, it's a question that goes deeply into my heart. And I think what is truly wonderful about the question is the fact that so many young women, some men as well, but so many young women are asking themselves the question. I think that is the beautiful part about it. Because in the past, there was no question that the role of any woman was to procreate herself. That's what you're here for. And, women used to get married or start having children very early. And that was their biggest contribution to society. And in fact, families were judged according to whether they had children or, in the worst of all cases, whether they had male children, because female children didn't count. And so what I think is very important is that we're beginning to break that mold. And we're beginning to say, just because I am a woman that has procreation ability doesn't mean that I have to procreate. It actually means that I, as a responsible human being, can choose whether I'm going to have a child or not. And either answer is absolutely correct, because each one of us has to make that decision and has to come up with the answer. So there's not like there's a right answer or a wrong answer. What is fundamental is to ask ourselves the question, do we want to do that? And increasingly, I must say, young men are being part of that question. How fantastic is that? Now you have couples actually that come together and really talk about, okay, it's not automatic that just because we are a couple, we're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 children. No, that's not, there's no automaticity. Is that a word in English?
Can be.
Okay, we've made it now. There's no automaticity to being a couple, and therefore you have to have children. Now you're seeing much more thoughtful consideration of this as a couple or as a lone standing woman. And I think that that's progress, because we have to be able to break so many molds that we have inherited in the past that lead us without thinking into behaviors and actions that have led us into this problem. So stop, think, and make a choice. There's no right or wrong choice, but make it deliberately.
I think 1 or 2 may be better than 3 or 4. But yeah. Clay, another question?
Yes. Okay. So this is our last question of the day, and it comes
Can I
from.
just add into that very last question?
Sure.
Actually, no, I don't think I will. Sorry, I was going to say something about Clay then, but I think maybe that may be a little bit not appropriate to do.
Oh no,
Carry
go
on,
ahead.
Clay.
Yeah, Go ahead.
So
if you'd
Clay
like. Yeah.
is going to have a baby in a few
Yay!
months, and it's a fantastic thing. And it's great that you're going to do it. It's wonderful. You'll enjoy
And
it.
Clay, hold on. So am I assuming wrong that the two of you really thought about that and made an intentional choice?
Absolutely, but I don't think that, kind of like what you were saying, Christiana, my personal decision doesn't necessarily mean that someone else should also make that same decision.
Exactly.
But my wife Ray and I decided specifically to have children, and kind of how Rachel in the question here said, should I have kids and teach them to protect the planet? And that's fully our intention. So we went with that side of the choice, or we went
There
with
you
that
go.
choice, I should say, and that's what we're moving forward doing. So
Yay.
yeah, we're really excited too. Okay, so we do have one last question, and it's from Patrick in Berlin, and this is a very topical question of the time, and it's our last question. What do you think of Boris Johnson becoming prime minister? And do you think the UK will do a good job of hosting the climate negotiations in 2020?
I will turn the first part of that question over to the 2 British citizens, and I'm happy to answer the second part. Carry on.
I mean, it's a little bit difficult to feel good about anything to do with the way the UK is being governed at the moment. Our friends in the United States may feel very sad about the government which they have, and no doubt they do, and many terrible decisions are being taken. But the UK, I mean, my memory is the UK used to be a fairly moderate, sensible country making good decisions about a range of things, and it seems to have gone completely crazy. And there are certainly people in the new cabinet who are climate skeptics, who have had very questionable views on immigration. I personally really struggle with the whole concept of Brexit, so I can feel quite distraught about the situation in the UK at the moment. Having said that, Boris Johnson surprised me when he was Mayor of London on climate and other issues. I think he is a political opportunist. And I think if he senses that the wind is blowing in the direction of which strong action on climate change is good for him politically, then I think we've got a shot at him not being terrible, actually, on climate change in the UK. And I think that comes back to Extinction Rebellion, to the civil disobedience, to the people on the streets. I mean, it couldn't be more important at this moment that momentum is built up and taken further. I feel quite different about the COP hosting, actually, where I think that could be quite positive, but I'll leave that to Christiana.
And just a very brief word on British politics before Christiana tells us about the COP. I do think there's something rather wonderful, actually, about British politics at the moment, and that is left and right are tearing themselves apart. We've got Brexit, and it's just kind of looks crazy. And yet we have an extraordinary consensus on climate change, it would appear. Cross-party, a great climate change law, climate change committee coming up with great plans for the country. So there's a lesson in there that actually you can still kind of rip each other's hair out and have an agreement on climate change. But what about the COP, Christiana?
So I'm actually quite confident that the COP is in very good hands here in the UK. Still to be announced is in what city it will take place, so that'll be an exciting decision. But who the COP president is has already been decided. So Claire Perry, who was actually the Minister of State who led the UK delegation in Paris, will be the COP president. And because she was the head of the UK delegation in Paris, I know her quite well, and we worked quite closely together. And I know that she really understands this issue, that she's not one prone to be taken to the extreme on either side. She's not one for ideologies. She's a very practical person. She wants to get this solved in a way that is good for everyone. She has very much her feet on the ground, and I think she will do an extraordinary job. And she already has many of the relationships that are necessary, because a lot of this is about personal relationships. In addition to that, she apparently, maybe this will change, but this is going to be her exclusive job.
Yeah, that's great.
I mean, obviously she has responsibilities to her constituency.
Does she report to the Prime Minister? Do you know?
Well, I don't know who she's reporting to.
Because that would be amazing.
But the fact that it doesn't seem like she's going to have a cabinet position and a whole other, range of issues, I think people who are not very close to this underestimate the amount of work that it is to carry the political baton for any negotiation, 2020 being the negotiation that is as important as the 2015 in Paris. This is it. I mean, between 2015 and now, well, of course, we'll have a COP now in Chile, but the results of this year are not as critically important to the future of this planet as the results of next year. So the fact that she has, at least until we're proven wrong, been freed from everything else and just focusing on that, I think is absolutely fantastic. And I cannot remember another COP president, certainly not during my time, which is before COP started. I can't remember any other COP president being in that luxurious position of having one job to do. So I think all of that is fantastic. And to add to that, I think the fact that the UK as a country is hosting is very symbolic. Let's remember that this is where the Industrial Revolution was born. This is the country that led the world into mining and using coal. This is the country that bred coal miners, coal workers. This is where that whole thing was born, right? And the UK today can proudly say that it has come off the addiction of coal, which just 10, 12 years ago was more than 50% on the energy grid, and it's now less than 4%. In fact, many days zero coal, because I follow it on a daily basis. And that's fantastic. What an example.
Yeah, it's huge.
What an example for other countries to be able to be inspired by the experience of the UK. And then, of course, the fact that the UK has taken on this zero net emissions by 2050, which is frankly what everyone is going to have to do. So, yeah, I definitely celebrate that COP26 is going to be in the UK.
Getting patriotic.
It's an unusual feeling.
Oh, I'm going to sing God Save the Queen in a minute. But...
Cool. That's all the questions, is it, Clay?
That's all the questions.
Okay. I mean, that was a great, very different episode of Outrage and Optimism. As I said earlier, we've been live now for 3 months, and we're now going into August, where we're going to take at varying times bits of time off. So the next few weeks of the podcast are going to be a little different. There might be some conversations that we're having. There might be some other things that Clay puts
great
together.
interviews.
Some great interviews that will come out, but they'll just have a slightly different style, and then we'll be back to our normal delivery in a few weeks' time. We'll put the date out on Twitter. We'll put it out in one of the future podcasts. We really, really appreciate all of you listening to the podcast, coming with us on this journey. It has gone further and faster than we could have imagined when we started it 3 months ago. So thank you so much for joining us. And any closing words, fellow co-hosts?
Paul.
Can I say something?
Of course.
Well, I
Clay.
just want to say to everyone who sent us in questions, thank you so much. It was really fun to go through the questions. And if you have more questions, obviously I have questions. Paul has questions. We'll probably email ourselves the questions. We send them to us at podcast@globaloptimism.com.
Nice.
Thank you, Clay. Look, my last word, I was saying it earlier, I don't know if we picked it up. We're only spending 10% of the economy right now fighting climate change. If we get that up to 30%, we're all going to be fine. For the sake of our children, for the sake of our society, this is easy to do. We can do it. We've got to do things differently, but it's such an exciting time. That's me.
Well, I was going to say something much more mundane.
Go for it.
I was going to speak about the podcast itself and say, as we admitted in the beginning, we really started from ground zero without having any idea of podcasting, if that's a verb. And what we would really like to do is to learn from you. We would really love, thank you for sending the questions, and I'm sorry that we only got around to a few of them, but we would really love if you would send in suggestions of how do you think we can make this better? How do we make it more informative? How do we make it more varied? How do we make it more fun? How do we make it, more accessible to more people? Our aim is that every single person that listens to the podcast will actually recommend it to at least 10 people and say, you really have to listen to this, because we believe that there's a message here that is that is quite new and quite helpful in this battle that we have with climate change. But we're still learning the ropes. And so we are very, very fervent believers in collective wisdom, and we would love to learn from you. So, send us the questions, but also send us suggestions as to once we get back into the saddle, which will be, I don't know, sometime.
A few weeks.
What else can we do? What can we do differently? What can we do more of, less of? What would you
Better.
like?
What can we do better?
What can we do better?
Be better.
Yes.
That's a very good note to end on. All right. Clay, why don't you take us out?
Okay, this has been another our first another episode of Outrage and Optimism. You can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, at Global Optimism. And if you have any questions or suggestions, you can email them to us, or comment, or reshare, or retweet, or anything like that. We read all the comments, we read the emails. We'd love to hear more from you about how we can do this better. So please reach out to us, let us know. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.